show. And so if you just bear with me while I get all these up and running. Every day from Monday to Friday, I like to give a show on the healthy mind. And this week, good morning. I am going to be giving a show on the healthy mind, and I tell you, this week is going to be a challenge week. And the reason why that's going to be a challenge week is because I'm going to be talking about a word or a phrase that most people have a problem with. Most people probably have a misunderstanding with. So let me get all this on before I mention this crazy word. Most of you heard this last week. Already knows what I'm going to be talking about. So welcome. Welcome on YouTube, welcome on Facebook, welcome on Instagram. If you have any questions, just put it in the comments and I will get right to you. Okay? So, we're going to be talking about the healthy mind. And we've been discussing the healthy mind for several weeks. Last week, I'd like to thank all my people. Welcome. If you have any questions about the healthy mind, please put it in the comments. And I would love to answer all your questions. Today I'm going to be talking about this great cosmic word. I don't know how big I can write it for it to fit, but we're going to be talking about consciousness. That is a huge word, and I'm going to circle it. So, we have, as much as we've done the studies and the life on of consciousness, we don't really fully understand it. We do know it's important. We do know that having consciousness is important. We also know that believing that we can be a part of something that we are significantly of, and to know that we are. To know that we are awakened. To know that we are existing. To know that we are alive. Is consciousness. It is the between us and the now, and to also think about the next. Because if there's levels of consciousness, and I'm just going to go over the whole complete view of what we're going to be talking about this week, because we're going to be talking about the science of consciousness. We're going to be talking about the life of consciousness. Because life, you got to remember, if you write down some of these numbers, we have 100 billion neurons that fire within our brain. 100 billion. 100 billion neurons. We've talked about the brain chemistry before. We've talked about our chemistries and how it works, and we're going to get into the brain, because that's why I did the brain and the different levels of rational mind, wise mind, right? We talked about the brain. We talk about the different synapses. We talk about how the brain fires. Remember, the brain is a processor and a producer. It's a process and a producer. And if it's a process and a producer, and we are firing 100 billion neurons with our thoughts, where does consciousness come in? Consciousness comes in, and I'm going to try to really simplify this about what we're going to be talking about. It is the connection of two hemispheres. At once. Two hemispheres at once. at all times. Not the left side, not the right side. And to fire, hey honey, how you doing? My wife's on, and then Juan is also on. Welcome. If you guys have any questions about consciousness and what I'm talking about, I'm just going to go over, again, I'm going over what we're going to be talking about this week on consciousness. Consciousness it's an argument. You know why? Let me take a sip of my coffee. It's an argument or disagreement because in consciousness, we can be talking about God. Religion, right? So if we start talking about religion, the dogmatic of how people are taught religion, or we're talking about all creation. All creation. All of creation is part of our consciousness. So many people, I think, look at God as being the creator, but it's all of creation. It's all things, right? And in consciousness, when you are conscious, you've heard these terms, the awaken. That means to realize what you are and what you are doing. The lowest level of consciousness is, most people know this if they've done any reading or research or anything, it's called the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain just thinks about survival, like a crocodile, you know, or anything reptilian. So it just looks for survival. That's it. It lives long, but that's it. Survival, that's it. Then you have the next stage of, you can have stages of consciousness. And the reason why we can get into stages of consciousness is because we know that they're building robotic structures that mimic human being, and the only part they're having trouble with is the consciousness behavior. Knowing thyself. What? To know thyself to be true, right? One of those old phrases, to know thyself to be true. It is to know thyself. And it's not just to know thyself, and this is why I've been doing the healthy mind, because in this time of crisis, we're getting influxed with an emotional state of things that we would like to know, things that we think we should know. And then it goes into those 5 things I've talked about before, and those 5 E's, and I'm going to write it in, is expectation, experience, energy, education, environment. Those are the 5 E's that can hurt you. Using this as just information is different. Because these, you got to think about, if you think of something in a day, does one of these E's fall into it? Are you listening to me and hearing my voice because you expect to hear my voice? You thought what my voice would sound like. If you've never seen me before, if you were blind, you didn't hear from an experience. This sounds like someone I have once touched before. So we fall into these traps of these 5 E's. And consciousness is the firing of all those neurons in both hemispheres together. We know that if you fire enough activity in transmitting, and that's, remember, we're transmitters. If you fire enough activity, we become conscious. Enough activity. Not like, I know, 100 billion. I'm not talking about 1 billion neurons. I'm not talking about 2 billion neurons. I'm talking about enough activity. And what they have measured so far is every time, and this goes back into particle waveforms. This goes into particles. We know that 99% of all matter, it's actually 99.9, of all matter is space. From the deepest part of our brains to the deepest part of space, of out of the galaxy in the universe, 99% of it is mostly space. If you've never heard that before, hopefully you do some reading. Hopefully this will create some research for you. Hopefully this will be like, oh my God. So remember, and I also talked about, we did communication. Most of the communication is internal. It's an internal action. But consciousness is more than an internal action. It's all of it. It's all of it. We have so we've had scientists talk about consciousness from Carl Sagan to Newton to Einstein to Pavlov. And now, if most of you people understand what Pavlov's response is that he was talking about the pleasure centers of the brain, right? That if you show the dog something that knew was going to get a treat, it starts salivating. Or if you mention something that it triggered the retreat without you showing the treat, it started to salivate. And we know that young children have more of a consciousness state younger than older because we start to block them off with constructs, with divisions of people, us, them. Consciousness encompasses all things of matter. And then if we are being triggered and trained like in our pleasure centers of the brain, and that is what's triggering, then we're not. The subconsciousness, from the age of 8 years old to whatever age you are now, all of it is trained. You're trained from the ages of 0 to 8. You're trained, and your subconscious now works in that space of 92% of your active life. Ask yourself, when you are doing something, is there anything different? You just change the environment, but you're using the education thing that you had learned from the ages of 0 to 8. All your hand movements, all your walking, unless you retrain it. And the only way you can do that is if you develop an active participant in your life, of understanding of who you are and who you want to be. Until then, you're falling back into 90% of subconsciousness. Consciousness has been looked at, and there's so many different scientists. We've been doing this for a long time, for neuroplasticity, to the gray matter, to the to how we look at how we measure consciousness. We know that it's either the quarks and electrons of the different atomic structures, the subatomic structures, that we can measure it. But every time we put a measuring stick on consciousness, it breaks into different waveforms. It dissipates. Fascinating, right? I mean, I love science, but I also love being a living human being. And for us to become sentient beings, we knew that we were alive. Yeah. Because even a monkey, or the different higher level states of the animal world, a monkey knows its place and relation to others. That's one of the states people say of consciousness, of knowing its relation to others. I am this tall to someone else. I am this short to someone else. I am this far from someone else. I'm faster than someone else. That is just a second part of consciousness. Some animals who have what they call higher level consciousness already know this. A butterfly doesn't know that it's bigger than another butterfly. But a monkey does, a dolphin does, even the cats do, the lions and the tigers. They know how big they are, they know how fast they are, they realize the correlation to their environment. What those animals have, what we're supposed to be the higher consciousness, is to know ourselves, know all of that, and still have perception of tomorrow. Not expectation of tomorrow. Have an understanding of tomorrow. There's no animal in the world you can say, see you tomorrow, and be like, yep, I got it. They don't know what tomorrow is. They don't know what time is. They don't know what space is. Us as conscious beings, as human beings, understand that. If we are awake. And to be awakened is to know both hemispheres. See, if you have any questions, again, put it in the box. I know this is going to go into, and the reason why, how does education hurt you? Education, okay, so education, when I use the word education, it means something that was taught to you that you just do. That's it. That's how education hurts you. I've said this before, I'm trying to give you information. You use information how you want to. But if you're like, okay, so think about it. Just think about how many hundred years ago that we knew the world was flat. That was taught. We knew the world was flat. No, it wasn't just information. It were like, nope, this is it. We also knew that we could not get to the moon. It was impossible. We also knew that there was only X amount of moons. We knew that. Those are education. Education are constructs, meaning that it blocks you from thinking outside of the complete part. Like Carl Sagan said, children think of possibilities. We also believe that we are made of this world. We are like apples from a tree. You don't say that we grow from this world. We can trace back our genetic plant structure for almost 4 billion years. And from that algae, we become what we are now. That's why you start getting into consciousness is very difficult for people, because then you say, well, God created us. Okay, it still doesn't take away from us evolving from an algic state, single cell organisms, to this sentient being. It still doesn't take away from that. Doesn't take away from what is allowed and was allowed, except we fall into the trap that's going to block us. Free will. How does free will fall into consciousness? How does free will fall us into consciousness? How does it disturb us? Well, free will doesn't answer for using both hemispheres with enough activity. Remember, we've got 100 billion neurons. If you start to forget your numbers, start to say, well, how many neurons does it take for me to fire? When you are in a subconscious state, you fire less neurotransmitters. You have less sympathetic nerve waves when you're only doing things in repetitive form. When you do new things, you fire and create new sympathetic waves. New ones. If you do something the same way you do every day, I pick up this the same way every day, I drive, your neurotransmitters stop firing. They're going off of what you call a regurgitated state. They're just staying stagnant. So when you talk about consciousness, you're talking about firing, having enough activity. That means firing more activity, not going back into what we call what I'm used to, using those words. This is what I'm used to. This is how I understand it, education. This is what I was taught. Well, have you challenged your thought? Challenge your thought. You can go back. You know what? Sometimes one part I dislike about scientists is that they have a theory and then they try to prove their theory. Well, you could just say, well, this is what I think, and that's it. You don't have to prove it because you're not trying to change me. Remember, my information I'm trying to help you with a healthy mind is to give you information of how we can be more conscious, how you can awaken, how you can create higher activity. Higher activity creates consciousness. Otherwise, you fall back into subconscious states of behavior, which is 92%, right? And we know it goes back in internal speak. And this is why we fall back into the same thing. Why does something disturb you? Do you understand that? Have you questioned why things are for you? Why you like the things you do? Why you believe in the things you do? And if you're unable to get past, well, this is just something I was taught. This is just something I've been through, my environment. This is just something I've been through, and I know this works. I know how to pedal a bike. This is how you know how long I've been pedaling a bike? I'm over 50 years old. I know how to pedal a bike. You're talking through experience, through an education process, and an expectation of what you believe. Have you challenged the way you ride a bike? What if I put you on a unicycle? Well, it's not a bike. Remember, a bike is it's a tricycle, right? With 3. So that's not a bike. So you start to break off and you start to narrow, like, if it was a bike, well, okay, what about a motorcycle? Well, we call that a bike. Well, see, now I got to get into and explain, well, that's a motorbike. You said bike. Well, most people say this is a bike. So you see how you start to do this with your thought process to keep you in a box. Your unhealthy mind keeps you in a box that only you can formulate and correlate and to rationalize, for you to quantify your reasons. And that's the problem with humans. We have an issue with trying to quantify. Like, if you can't explain it, then it's not really, doesn't do anything. If you can't explain it, then what's the purpose? So this week, we're going to be talking about consciousness. We're going to be going over consciousness. I don't know if this is only going to be a week long. This may stir up a little bit of hostility in people because it's going to break down some walls. And the only way we can break down the walls that we've created is to go beyond it, to challenge yourself. If you're unable to challenge yourself, then anyone who challenges you in the way you think, you are angered. And this is where consciousness and all of creation comes into problem with. Because once you get angered, you start to go back into reptilian brain. And once you're in reptilian brain, you're only thinking about survival, right? That's it. What I need to defend. Yeah. So consciousness. Welcome to the Consciousness Week on the Healthy Mind. I'm Dr. Paul. You can always catch me at drpaulholisticscience.com, or you can always reach me on all the social media. If you have any questions throughout the week, please share, like, and comment, and tell me what your thoughts are. So we can, and I know I like to keep this in 20 minutes, but I want to keep you healthy, keep you safe, and keep you blessed. Make sure you do your meditation, do your prayers, and do your exercises to keep that healthy mind working so we can stop all those bad chemicals we talked about before. You guys have a great Monday.